Sorry about that, guys. I realized I was muted. So we'll give it just a few more minutes, see if anyone else is going to join today, and then we'll get started. Hey, Roy, welcome. Thanks for joining us today. So we are just going to give it a few more minutes to see who else hops in, and then we'll get started shortly.
Sounds good. Thank you very much.
All right, guys, so we will go ahead and hop into it this morning. So my name is Megan Templeton. I am one of the consulting attorneys here at Royal Legal. I have been doing real estate and asset protection and small business attorney work for roughly about the past 6 or so years, have had investments of my own. And inside of that, I'm particularly interested in the short-term space. And so the goal here today is to really have you guys, one, be able to connect in this network setting, if this some opportunities for community there, but also to give you the information you need about how to properly utilize the Series LLC for short-term investors. So right now, we've got Lavetta and Royce in here. Now, Lavetta, I know you are actually a current customer for us. So some of this information might be duplicate for you, but I'm happy to have any Q&A questions here at the end that might be useful for you in your business. So how we typically get these meetings started is we do typically kind of do an overview of what this meeting will look like format-wise. So what we're going to do inside of here is we're going to start this off with just a general discussion of what brought you here today, your name, your location, your investor area. Ken's going to drop a list of about 7 items if you guys want to walk through any of those question prompts and give us a little information about you. From there, we'll go into a presentation about how the Series LLC can be used for a short-term investor. And then we'll do a little bit of a discussion afterwards of things that may have come up for you during the presentation, things that you now want to utilize or areas you want to improve on. And we'll also have a short Q&A. So to go ahead and get started, what I'd like us to do is, if you are comfortable, if you will just raise your hand, and you can do so by using the reaction button down here at the bottom, on the bottom of your Zoom screen, and just tell us a little bit about yourself and your investing portfolio, what you're interested in, and then we'll go from there. So does anybody want to jump us off this morning? Hey, Charlie, how are you? Good to see you, Muddy. All right, Royce, well, let's go ahead and get started. Royce, tell us about yourself.
Hey, well, good afternoon, everyone, or afternoon on the East Coast. My name is Royce Spence. I am new, relatively new, I'll call it, to the real estate investment space. I've been basically trying to get myself set up for the past 3 months. I'm looking more for long-term, but I figured if a short-term meeting was put out, why not attend, see what was there as well. What else did you want to know?
Just I think we'll just keep it kind of a basic introduction. So what I'm hearing is that you are looking to probably do long-term holds, maybe short-term though. Do you have any properties currently? Is there anything that's going well for you as you gear up for this business inside of real estate? Just any knowledge you'd like to share with the group?
Don't have any properties currently. I'm looking actually to get myself kind of squared away and protected, I guess, early on before moving forward, if that makes sense. I'm a little bit concerned about the Series LLC because it's not recognized in the state of New Jersey. So, like some more information about that, but, just here to learn, basically.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us today, Royce. Hopefully the information we get out to you will be helpful. And then anything that comes up for you during the presentation, feel free to drop it in the chat. That's a great way to get your questions answered. Or if you want to verbally talk about them at the end, we'll also have that Q&A session for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Charlie, Lavetta, would either of you guys like to share this morning?
Good morning.
Morning, Charlie. How are you, my friend?
Good. Sorry, I was muted there for a little bit.
That's okay.
Yeah, I'm a seasoned investor, but what I'm looking at is I'm actually looking at diversifying my investments. Now, for years, I was looking at and actually working in single family investments, long-term buy and holds. I did a lot of fix and flips, about 18 years worth of fix and flips. So I have a pretty extensive background on that side, but what I'm looking at is some of my rentals. I'm over in the Hawaii region, and a lot of my rentals have been being considered for, or I was using for short term, but Hawaii's market changed. And so a lot of the short-term rentals are now isolated into 4 specific areas that you actually have to be in resort zones. They call them resort zones. Mm-hmm. So what I'm looking at is expanding out beyond Hawaii into other regions that have either similar or opportunities that I can look at building more short-term, rentals as well.
Awesome. Well, fantastic. Well, thanks, Charlie, for sharing. As always, it's always a pleasure having you in these calls. So I see we've got Erica's joining us now, and then we've got Lavetta. If either of you would like to share, we've got 7 questions here in the chat that are prompts. We're just kind of doing general introductions at this point before we hop in the presentation. So if either of you would like to share, we'll give it just another minute. You can throw that reaction pad up, and I'd love to hear what you've got going on in your business.
Okay, I'll go ahead and start. So currently, I'm in the process of closing on a short-term rental. I do have a partner. And part of the interest in this group is because we have our structure with Scott, with Royal Solutions. So I have my own LLC, and he's getting, his business partner is getting his own LLC by the team. And so what we wanted to do is create a partnership LLC in order for that to filter through our individual LLCs as 50-50 partnerships. So right now we're in that process, and we're talking to somebody to getting all that structure in place first.
Okay.
But yeah, so this is our first go at it. We're going to be closing here probably within the next 2 weeks, and then kind of hit the ground running from there. I mean, it's all moves very quickly, but it's definitely doable, and there's a lot of potential, and the numbers are just kind of, they don't lie.
Yeah, no, you're right. Let me ask you, Era, what area are you in? Where's the property going to be located?
Waco.
Oh, nice. Okay, I spent some time in Waco recently and really like the area, and I think it seems like it's definitely one that's ripe for a short-term rental.
Yeah.
So that's great. Okay. Well, thanks for joining us.
Process. Thank you.
Yeah, and congratulations on the property.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, Lavetta, if you'd like to share, no pressure, but feel free to. This will be the time. Yeah.
Hi, this is Lavetta. I'm located in Missoula, Montana. I have some long-term rentals. I just closed on 4 townhomes in Lubbock, Texas.
Nice.
And my main question now is I do have, you guys did set up the series LLC, but my main question is the mortgages being due on sale. I'm worried that the mortgages are they're gonna call them due once I transfer them over into the LLC. And I'm wondering, I think there's a law that prevents that, but I need to know for sure that that applies to all types of mortgages. These aren't conventional mortgages.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure that, that's how everything's okay there.
Yeah. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to go ahead and tackle that question for you, because the presentation we're going to move into next is kind of a broad overview of the series. So if that's something that is a little more broader scope than you want to hang out for, let me go ahead and tackle this one for you. Now, I will say it's a little bit difficult for me to advise on that without more information about the loans, but let me take it from a high level view and then we can dig in from there. And guys, hopefully you'll find this interesting and useful for your careers as well. So there's something called the Saint Germain Act, and the Saint Germain Act says that if you have a property with a loan on it, with like a residential loan, so not a commercial loan, if you have a typical loan and it's a single family residence or something with 4 or less units. So if you get into the multi-unit, it's got 5 units, 5 doors plus, it's not going to apply. But so anything 4 or less, the Saint Germain Act is going to apply. And what that says is you can take title to a property and take the loan in the name of one entity or individual's name, and you can move it over post-closing without it triggering the due on sale clause. So for example, Lavetta, if you have a property that's in your name and the mortgage is in your name now, but it is a 1-door single family residence home, you can move that post-closing into the series and not have any concerns with it whatsoever. The lender has no standing to call that note due. Now, if it is something that has 5 or plus doors, we do need to have a conversation with your lender about that, or if it's an alternative loan type, like a commercial loan or a wraparound, something of that nature. So those are the considerations you really want to dig into. And anytime you have these lending questions or anything, guys, they are a little personalized. So I would always recommend hitting up our team individually so we can walk through your specific circumstances. But that's the high level overview of you can move things over post-closing if it is 4 or less doors and it is a typical type of residential loan. Does that help you out there, Lavetta?
It does. Thank you. We'll probably need to dig more into it because it is a commercial portfolio loan.
Okay.
They are individual units, so that's interesting.
Yeah, so hit me up via an email. I'm going to drop my email in the chat right now because it sounds like we've got some specific circumstances we need to talk about. And we also may need to loop in your lender, which is something we can certainly do. So I just dropped my email there for you. Let me make sure I got all of it right without any typos. Looks good to go. So hit me up on that one. And guys, another note that we always do like to say, though, as long as the note is performing, most of the time the lenders are not going to be calling that note due. I mean, their goal is to make the money, right? And if that money is coming in, they're not going to pay a lot of attention to it. Now, I don't ever want to give that as binding legal advice. We want to play by the rules, but I like to give that little caveat as well. So yeah, but Lavetta, please feel free to email me and we'll talk through the particular circumstances of those loans for you. All right, guys. So I think at this point, if there's not any other questions or introductions we want to do, we'll go ahead and hop into the presentation. So for this part, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We've got a slide deck we're going to walk through. As I am going through the presentation, if you have any questions or anything that comes up, want to keep them top of mind, go ahead and drop them in the chat, and then we'll circle up on the back end and answer them there. Just give me just a minute to share my screen. Apologies, guys, running into just a bit of a hiccup. So as I'm getting this set up, guys, if you guys want to grab a drink of water, use the restroom, anything you need to do, it'll take me just a moment. All right, everybody. So if you will give me a thumbs up if you can see the slideshow presentation, that would help me a lot. Fantastic. Okay, so here's the presentation we've got for you guys today. So we're talking about the series LLC and how does it relate to you specifically as a short-term investor. You'll hear a lot of talk about these buy and hold kind of things, but I wanted to tailor this a little bit more for you guys who have to consider things like licensing and county regulations. There's a lot more that goes into it. So we'll do a general overview and take questions at the end. So a little bit of background about me. Like I said, I am a consulting attorney here at Royal Legal. Been doing this for a while. I have bought and sold 3 businesses and invested in short-term rentals, long-term rentals, also been in the note micro loan game as well. So I've got a lot of history in this space and really enjoy it. So risk factors you're going to run into, things we are looking to prevent. So I think the kind of the foundational piece when we always start talking about these asset protection structures is why do we need them? And there are a lot of risk factors anytime you go into real estate, but they can be minimized to where they are negligible. And so, but what you're going to be looking at and really trying to protect from are things like frivolous lawsuits. And, you know, we've got clients, for example, it mentions here a $3 million frivolous lawsuit. That's a real case study from a client we had who had a breach of contract issue come up, had a very litigious tenant. And it ended up because the right structures were not in place beforehand, before they gave us a call, had some pretty serious ramifications. So things you're going to be looking for that are going to put you at risk are going to be properties inside of your personal name. Anytime you've got a property listed in your personal name, that also puts your other personal assets at risk. So any assets attached to you individually. So we want to get those properties outside of you. Next thing is relying solely on insurance. So you'll hear a lot, well, I don't need an asset protection structure because I have a very generous insurance policy. Well, insurance companies, you know, they do provide a service, but at the end of the day, their business model is built on their ability to collect premiums and not have to pay out often. So they're going to be looking to cut their costs and not pay out when they can. So those insurance policies are not a catch-all. Next thing is going to be the lack of compartmentalization. If you have a lot of assets in one place and one of those assets is put at risk, the other assets grouped in with that are going to become at risk as well. So you don't want to have one bucket that's got 4 different items in it because those 4 items are all at risk as opposed to if they were in 4 separate buckets. Next thing is going to be lack of anonymity. If someone can't find you, they can't file a lawsuit against you. If they can't connect something to you, then you're going to be able to go further. If your name is out there and prevalent and they know exactly who to turn to, then you're going to have a lot greater chance of having a lawsuit filed. Next one is the personal exposure to lawsuits. That also loops into the top portion of having personal properties in your name. So when you have these lawsuits brought against business activities, even if those business activities are in your name, your personal activities are at risk. And so, you know, that loops into, it puts things that your family interacts with at risk. And so you want to be really careful to separate that out. Next thing is more of an operational piece, which is this idea, if you have too many LLCs, you're going to have too many operational pieces. So you're going to have more bank accounts, more tax returns, more bookkeeping, more opportunities for things to go wrong. So we really want to minimize and streamline as much as we can. So these are the risk factors we've got for it. And so you'll see here, we mentioned again, that insurance really is the last resort. You do not want to trust a corporation who their goal is to get out of spending money. They do not want to pay those policies off as much as they can. You want to control your protection. So inside of that, the best way to control that protection is for you to set up your structures to avoid any lawsuits in the first place. One of the things we talk about here at Royal Legal is that rich people don't own things. They don't pay taxes. And you may be looking at me saying, how do I get there? How do I not own things and not pay taxes? Our structures are set up so that the items are removed from you. That removes that litigation risk, also has some tax benefits. And how do you minimize and not pay taxes on things? You use the structures we have in place, work with your CPA or CPA recommendations from us if you need it. And inside of that, we'll teach you the strategies to minimize that tax burden and also to make sure you're protected while doing it. So lawsuits are going to happen. I mean, I think there's a stat about real estate investors that if you invest for 20 plus years, you've got a 90% chance of having a lawsuit at some point. And so our goal is to make sure those lawsuits don't occur, but if they do, to minimize to the very lowest level of what could be recovered from them. So it's not necessarily about when you're going to be, or if you're going to be sued, it's going to when you're going to be sued. Honest people get sued every day. You may be operating your business way above board. the problem that comes into thinking like that and saying, well, I operate above board, I'm not going to be litigated against, you've got to assume that the other parties who might bring litigation are also operating above board. One of the things we've seen here at Royal Legal is a lot of the lawsuits that come up, the litigious party may not be quite forthcoming, or it may be too complex for them to understand. And you're going to have items thrown at you that may not be truthful, but which can be knocked down, but you're going to have to deal with them. So let's have the structures in place to minimize that impact. Lawsuits are a business. So what does that mean? What are we looking at when we say lawsuits are a business? So when an attorney gets involved, say that someone comes to me and says, I've had this injury, I've had this wrong. What I'm looking at as an attorney is, what is this claim size going to be? What's the potential recovery, and what's the probability of collecting that recovery? And so what you want to do is make it where someone who is looking to litigate against you, by the time they go to an attorney to start that process, that attorney is going to tell them, well, you know, the claim size might be large, but you're not going to be able to collect on this because we don't know who owns it and we don't know if they have any assets. And majority of the time, that's going to shut anything down. So our goal is to minimize the claim size and probability of collecting. Probability of collecting being the big one we have the most control on. So what's a series LLC? How does that interact with these previous things that I just walked through? So we'll do some bases of it here now for you. Key features that I want to highlight on this. Series LLC is infinitely scalable for free. You don't have a ton of extra filings like you would if you use something like the hub and spoke model. You can operate it with streamlined business practices, so streamlined accounting records, streamlined banking accounts, streamlined bookkeeping, tax returns. You have one entity to form and one entity to maintain, and you can use it in any state regardless of where you form it. So let's get into the specifics of how those things are true. So I know, Royce, you actually had brought up this idea of, can the series LLC be used everywhere? You know, it's not something that's available in my state. So if I set one up, can I still use it here? Answer is yes. So there's not a lot of case law on the series LLC. And I get the question a lot of, well, isn't that a con? And I don't think so. Because the fact that there isn't a lot of case law means there hasn't been a lot of reason for it to be challenged, one. But the times it has been challenged, it is held up. So there is recently been one case about this, and inside of it, the court says this LLC was properly maintained and we're going to withhold these separate series inside of it. Now, what does that look like, though, for me to be able to set up a series in Texas and use it, for example, in Missouri? So you're saying, I didn't set this up in my state. I don't have a connection with Texas. You may not even have a property there. So how can you set this up in Texas or one of the states that allows the series LLCs, but utilize it somewhere else? And that comes down to the full faith and credit clause in the Constitution, which the full faith and credit clause says you can set it up. You can use it in any state. If you are sued in a different state where it operates when it's formed, the state's going to look at the law of the state where you formed that business LLC. So if you've got operations in Missouri and then you get sued with a Texas LLC, Missouri is going to look back to Texas to see what kind of laws do we need to be applying here. So the statutes are pretty clear and they're well recognized. And so even inside of, if the series hasn't been challenged, this full faith and credit clause has been challenged hundreds and hundreds of times. And it always holds up that you can have an entity in one state and use it in a different one. So that hopefully that'll eliminate this concern of not having it available in the state of where you're at. So it is just an LLC with a caveat. There's nothing new for the courts to consider in that. It's not a revolutionary LLC. The only difference is than a traditional LLC is it does allow you to have those separate child series. So it's not this big idea they can't wrap their heads around. There's a long history of forming these corporations and using them in this other states. So there is also a past precedent of using LLCs in states other than formation. So we've got a lot of support if anything ever were to come up about having an LLC in a state different than you live in or do business in, but most likely we're not going to need it. I mean, like I said, these things aren't getting challenged, but if we do, everything ever comes up, our team's here, we've got the support for it, we'll make sure you're covered. So next thing is, as a short-term investor, do you need that series LLC? Is that something that's going to benefit you versus something like a hub and spoke model or a traditional LLC? The question that would come up next for me is, do I need it? And if so, when do I need it? So what we typically tell people, if you don't have any assets, no business activities, no business, no credit to come work with, do not need to improve your credit, it may not be the right time for an LLC. You may want to hold off until you start getting your business activities. Now, if you are on the cusp of buying properties, What I always tell people is I think it's better to have those things up front if you know you're going into it, because it's easier to put things into a structure than to have to retroactively and try to put them in on the back end. But if you are right at the beginning, it may not quite be the right time for you, and we've got other strategies we can implement. If you've got just one property, you can get away with using just a traditional LLC at that point. Now, if you grow, if you plan on scaling, you're going to eventually have to change that structure. But you may be saying, Megan, I'm not going to grow or change for another couple of years. So the traditional LLC might be a good fit for you at that time. But if you know you're going to hit the ground running, your goal is to make a large business quickly. I think starting with a series LLC for short-term investors is the right call. Reasons I think that. One, it's going to allow you to have the structure in place so you can have peace of mind when you go into the purchasing process that you know where these properties need to land. Two, it's easier to set up with these short-term platforms on the front end. So one of the things we do, particularly with short-term investors, is work from a dual LLC model. We'll have a series LLC as well as a traditional LLC. The series will be your holding and the traditional is going to be your operations. And so when you're working with those short-term platforms to get on them so you can start getting those bookings, you want to be talking to them about what is my asset holding and what actually do I want to collect rent through. And we'll get to more in how to work that. But I think it's important if you are going to hit the ground running and get on multiple platforms and have multiple advertising opportunities to get the structure right up front. So bigger picture on this. What are we looking for with this LLC? And so here you'll see we've got the 5 pillars of protection: anonymity, liability, separation, isolation, and insurance. What you're going to do with those items, if you support them all fully, is achieve financial freedom. You're going to reclaim your time, protect your assets, and you're going to build your legacy. Now, the caveat to all these is you have to use them correctly, but we can help you get them in place and then teach you how to use them so they're going to remain in place. This is the full map. This is what we typically recommend as a full scope. You want to come in and you say, I want every possible protection and planning strategy I could have. It's going to look like this. So taking a step back, things we're going to recommend is an estate plan. And the reason that's kind of number one for us is because you can purchase all these properties on the front end. You can get your business set up. If you don't have a plan to pass that generational wealth down to the next generations or to your friends, loved ones, whoever it may be, then you're going to have a lot of opportunity to put in a lot of work for your lifetime and not be able to share that with your loved ones. So we want to get that estate plan in place. We also use that estate plan as a critical part of our series LLC. So if you are thinking towards, estate planning, what that looks like, it's a good thing to get it going. Offshore trust, that's going to be something for people who have really got a lot of assets. I mean, we're talking like, 20 million plus, and you want to do some major tax deduction minimization. That's what you're going to be looking for. Parts of the estate plan, things to consider would be things like the living trust, the will, traditional LLC I talked about is the operating company. You've got retirement vehicles like the solo 401k we can put in place. But then really you'll see this kind of last section, these 7 through 11, those are talking specifically about the series LLC. And I think that's really the foundation from the perspective of that's what we're going to be looking at for the liability protection today. So this gives you a full scope, and we will have all, by the way, videos and also resources more about these other items if that's something you're interested in. So what does the series LLC does? It gives you ultimate security. It's going to give you protection for your future, and it's also going to minimize your risk. And it does that through things like anonymity, liability minimization, and making sure those structures are set up in place and supported by precedent as well as current legislation to hold up. Basics of the LLC for the series: you can form it in Delaware, Nevada, Texas, or Wyoming. There is charging order protection in place inside of those. They can be used in any state due to the full faith and credit clause like we talked about. So we can set them in any, we do typically use Texas. The charging order protections are great and the fees are minimal. So that's another thing you want to be looking at when you're setting these structures up, is where you set them up. The cost of it may vary as well because different states have different filing fees. Charging order protection, you may be saying, what actually is that? It's saying if they sue you personally, can they get to your ownership interest in the LLC? So we make sure the ones that we set up, not only are they statutorily protected with a charging order protection, we also make sure our documents are drafted where that's well spelled out. And you'll see over here on the right-hand side, this is the structure, the diagram of what the series LLC looks like. So up here at the top, you've got what we call the parent series LLC. This is the part that gets filed with the Secretary of State. It's got the information of who owns it. When we use a trust on top of that to give it anonymity, it gives information on who the registered agent is, if you need to serve any type of legal documents on it. And below, you'll see these child structures. So this is where you actually put in the property. So I want to point out here that the parent gets filed. So there's a one-time filing fee for that. But these child series, they are infinitely scalable. You can create as many as you need to, and there's never a separate filing for them because as you can see here through the diagram, they all flow up to the parent. So that parent filing is sufficient for these. So inside of these child series, we put one asset per child series. And so what that'll look like for short-term investors is you're going to put one property per child series. And the reason we do that is the name of the game is liability minimization. So inside of that one asset per child series, if that one property gets litigated against, that child series is the only one at risk. If there are no other properties in it, they can't recover any of your other assets. So if you've got child A, B, and C, and child A is litigated against, B and C do not even come into the equation. No one knows they're there. And so that's going to give you the ability to, in the event of a lawsuit, make sure that not much is recovered. Next thing is going to be time and energy. So that's what we're looking to save you. You know, the more time, energy, and funds we can save you, the more you can build your business. And so the way we do that is creating these concepts that are streamlined. So inside of these LLCs, you know, they're created and maintained with anonymity. You've got attorney-client privilege with our team, but you can run them through one bank account, which is going to save you a whole heck of a lot of time and fees on bank accounts that you would have to pay. One set of accounting books, so it's streamlined. You can look at one book, know exactly what's going on. It's also going to save you on fees because you don't need multiple software setups or someone to walk you through it. One or no tax filings, depending on if you have partners or if it's just you individually, but they are set up to be passed through. So it's going to minimize your tax prep, which I don't know if you guys have ever worked from a hub and spoke model or anything, but those tax filings can get pretty expensive pretty fast. So being able to streamline that's extremely valuable. And then, like I said, it's infinitely scalable because we can create as many of those child series as we need to without additional filings. Paying taxes. So I kind of hit on that a minute ago. Paying taxes is super easy. If you are single, it is a disregarded entity and it's going to report on your Schedule C or your E with your personal return. So you don't have a separate return for the series LLC. So your accountant's going to be able to pick it up, take it and run with it quickly and in a very inexpensive way. If you're married in a community property state, it's going to be the exact same as the scenario we just ran through. If you're unmarried or you are in a separate property state, and if you're unsure of that, ask our team. We can definitely help you point you in the direction on that. But then it's a simple issue of issuing K-1s, which I'm sure you're familiar with if you've done partnerships before. So this gives you a diagram of how unmarried partners are taxed again. And I like this diagram because I think it walks through the full flow of the money as well. So you'll see here in step 1, rental fees are going to be collected by the short-term rental platform, or if you try to do that individually, however you do it, the rental fees will come into what we typically say is a traditional LLC. It can be the series if you don't want to work with the traditional. That's something our team would need to navigate with you. Once those funds come into whatever account that you're going to be using, they're then sent to the parent LLC bank account. And so, you know, even if it's, like I said, you'll see here, you've got child series A below it. Even if you had B, C, or D, all of those funds come to a parent series bank account, that one bank account. Once you've got the money in there, that it becomes income you can distribute to yourself at your leisure. So you don't have to, you could leave it in the account, but if you want to take it out, pay yourself, take it out as income, pays you as the owner, and then you'll just have that income reported on your tax return. Single and married, it's a similar process in the scenarios we just walked through. And then here and kind of in closing, we've got some frequently asked questions, and this is, I think, where it gets a little more individualized for short-term investors. So the question I get the most when I'm working with STR people is, what do I do about if I have long-terms now or I get long-terms in the future? Can I hold them both inside of one structure, or do I have to set up 2 series? So you can actually hold short-term rentals and long-term rentals inside of the same series LLC. And really what that boils down to when you're talking about short-term versus long-term is the type of income. So is it passive or is it active? Historically, we said you needed to separate out those income types, but that is no longer the case. You can have both underneath your series LLC and they'll just be reported differently. So active is going to go on one schedule and then passive is going to go on another schedule, but your CPA will be able to do that for you. So you're still able to benefit from that one tax return and that one series, even if you have mixed types of investments at this point. So I think it's a big time and money saver for you. Next thing is going to be the licensing. That's the second biggest concern I get. And licensing is a little bit interesting, right? Because it is so individualized to the county and state you're in. What I have found in that is that we are, so far, we have always been able to make the licensing work inside of the structures we set up. Now, it is a process you want to work with, an attorney. It doesn't have to be one of ours or one of our attorneys on the licensing process, because it's too individualized to give a blanket statement about, but it's certainly something that our team is comfortable in researching, reviewing, and implementing for you. So we'll work you through those applications and renewal periods with you. Next thing is, my CPA going to understand what to do? Do I need a specialized CPA or a specialized software? Is it general enough to be able to just pick a CPA and go? It really is. The Series LLC, because the way the taxes work and it's so individualized, it's something you should be able to just get your typical CPA to do. Now, we do recommend those are in real estate because they're going to know more about deductions and things as well. But if you've got a CPA you've been working with for 20 years, it's something they should be able to easily pick up on. No need for special accounting software. A lot of people will just use QuickBooks. You got things like Stessa these days. There's all kinds of crack, and there's a lot of them out there that can be used. And I really don't think you need anything specialized with the Series LLC. And then I think, the platforms now also do a good job. Airbnb does a great job with accounting information as well. Next one is the Series LLC. It sounds great. So why is everyone not using it? And I think the answer to that is, it's not necessarily a new structure, but it is a newer one that is being recommended more and more. So people are just getting familiar with it. And then there's also a lot of misconceptions about it out there. And that's where we come in, wanting to make sure we answer any questions you have, any fears that have come up for you. Make sure you have a full understanding of what the series is, how it is supported legislatively and with court precedent, and how to functionally use it. So here they've just got some reviews we've had from past clients talking about how they've come into real estate, come in to find Royal Legal, and how we've been able to assist them with their careers. So these are in the slide deck. What'll happen after this presentation? The slide deck will get sent along with it. So you're welcome to go through and read these if you like. And then here at the end, we've got the Royal Legal quiz. That's something you can go through. I think it's the best way to connect with our team if you have individualized questions and you're not a current client. Use that quiz. It tells us exactly what your position is, so we know how to best connect you with the resources you need. But that's all I've got for now. So let me stop sharing my screen, and then we will be good to go. All right, guys, let's see here. All right, so it looks like we have got a question here in the chat. Can I take my current New Jersey-based LLC and translate it to the Series LLC, or would we make the New Jersey-based LLC manage your Series LLC? So Royce, let me go ahead and tackle that one for you. We do recommend, if you have an existing LLC and that if it doesn't have any assets inside of it, what we can actually do is use that LLC as an operating LLC. So it still can be used. It's not something that we've got to throw out with the bathwater, and then we'll just put the new structure alongside of it. All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, guys. So this is the time where we typically will jump into our breakout groups. We've got some new folks in here with us. Morton, Richard, Lisa, thank you guys for joining us. Alex, I see you there as well. So Ken, why don't we go ahead and actually do the individualized breakout groups this time, since we've got some more folks with us. And then we'll hop back in after that. That'll last about 10 minutes. We'll do a Q&A.
Perfect. One moment.
Thank you. And while we're doing that, Erica, I see you've got a question of how soon can a property acquired be transferred. We can transfer it immediately after you have ownership of it. There's not like a seasoning period. So we can definitely, as long as it is compliance with your lender, that Saint Germain Act, like we talked about, we can move it over immediately.
Hello.
Hey, Morton, I think some folks are still finishing up their breakout groups, and we'll hop back to
Okay.
our group here shortly.
Megan, in the meantime, if you wouldn't mind, I heard you say the Saint Germain Act just a second before you put us into the breakout sessions. Could you repeat that? Because I'm actually kind of exactly where that is necessary for me, right? Because that's about how these default clauses in mortgages cannot be upheld in the context of moving a property into the land trust, I believe.
Hey, everybody. Yeah. So Morton just asked another question about the Saint Germain Act. So let me recap that briefly for everybody for us questions on it. So Saint Germain Act is the exception to moving a property after closing that has a typical residential loan on it. So the Saint Germain Act says that if you've got a property that has got 4 or less doors, you can move it post-closing as long as it's a typical residential loan. Now, if it's a commercial loan, the Saint Germain Act is not going to apply. You're going to need lender approval anytime you move it post-closing. But if you have a typical loan with 4 or less doors, you can move it post-closing without even notifying the lender. Does that clarify it for you, Morton?
Can I just ask one thing? You said residential loan versus commercial, right?
Right.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that I understand that 100%. So commercial in this context is actually like a business. It's not, so a residential loan can still be a loan that is for not necessarily your own personal residence, but for a rental property.
Yeah,
Correct?
it can. So, you would know if it was commercial loan, it would have been tagged as such with the
Yeah.
with your lender, but that's going to be for things that are going to be multi-units or that you're going to close directly into an LLC with.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, hopefully the breakout groups went well for you. Anything come out of those breakout groups that you'd like to share with the group now? And then we've got about 5 or so more minutes here before we do need to start hopping off to get into the residential life group for our team. And we'll have a short Q&A, but I'd love to tackle and hear anything that came out of those groups for you. And so, like I said, if you want to speak, just hit that reaction button down there at the bottom for me.
Oh, okay, Megan. Thank you. I think you just clarified it for me. This is Alex. I had for some reason real life at 9:30. So okay, so now I got it. So we have you at 9, and then we have Scott at 10.
That's exactly right. So starting in about 10 minutes, we'll have that Royal Life class with Scott and then our COO, Gina. And so if you guys are interested in that Royal Life, that's going to be more of how to optimize it's more of a holistic approach to have the full life excellence. They've got some great tools they're walking through right now, a planner that Royal Legal has developed and sent out, and it's really helpful. So highly recommend that show as well.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Well, guys, since we only do have a few minutes, why don't we go ahead and move into the Q&A? Does anybody have any questions about using the series with short-term rentals that I can answer for you now? Yeah. Hey, Erica.
Hey, so Lavette and I were kind of talking about this in our breakout session. And so the question is, just for clarity and understanding, when you have, so right now, since we do have the loan in order to do the short-term rental, we had to put it in our own name, right? Okay. Partnership. So you said that at any point after post, you can transfer it into the LLC. But what about if we are, because definitely going to plan on using equity from that home and in an equity line of credit to then parlay that into something else or to do things that we need to take care of with that home. Now, do you have to leave it outside of the LLC in order to do that from a loan standpoint? Or is it this like take in and take out kind of deal? Or
yeah,
if you want to do that or whatever.
You're thinking about it exactly right. What we tell folks is anytime you're going to have a new financing event, so things like a refi, getting a HELOC, any type of things where you've got to go back to the lender for some type of renewed commitment to them, you want to actually either, if you think that's going to happen in the near future, let's just leave the property in your own name until that financing event occurs and move it into the series after. If it is something where we've moved it into the series, it's been a couple of years since you've owned it, we'll pull it out, complete the financing event, and then move it back in afterwards. Does that make sense?
Does the same thing apply for personal home, your primary?
For your personal residence?
Yeah. Like, do you need to have also your personal? Because I keep hearing mixed about that, whether if it's primary, you don't necessarily have to have it protected. But I'm like, well, if you have the structure, why not?
Well, I mean, that's a great way to think about it. There are some caveats to it though. So when you talk about moving your personal residence in and out, what you're going to run into is when you move a personal residence into an LLC type structure, any entity, you're going to lose some of those home ownership benefits. You're not going to be able to claim
That's
those
right.
credits. So it's
Okay.
not so much an idea of a protection thing, but you need to talk with your CPA and see, is it worth me moving in to get that little bit extra protection? Because you already have some inherent protections on primary residences.
Okay.
If you've got a home where you don't have a mortgage on it and you have full equity, it might be worth moving it out. But I think probably even then a better solution is to do some equity stripping. I'd say it's personalized, but majority of the time, most folks, we tell them don't move your primary residence in.
Okay. That's fair. Thank you.
You're welcome. Royce, what can I answer for you?
Sorry about that. So you mentioned something that kind of threw me for a little bit. So when you're talking about, for example, if I was to acquire a property that I was trying to burn, would you recommend then that I leave it out of the LLC during the process of construction and keep it in my personal name? And then once everything is done, move it in?
We typically for BRRRR recommend after the rehab portion of it, yeah. Now BRRRR, because it is a pretty specialized, individualized process, it's something we do recommend you walk through with our attorneys so we can guide you step of the way. But kind of the foundational rule is most of the time you're not going to move it in until after the rehab.
Okay.
Yeah.
How would, I don't know. I mean, I'm thinking about on the job protection, something should happen with somebody working on the house falling. Is that what my insurance policy is for?
So when you're dealing with like construction workers and things in the beginning of that rehab phase, you've got things like like you said, the insurance policies. Also the contract phase is really important at that part because you're going to have a lot of liability waivers already inside of those. But depending on the amount of contractors you have and the value inside of that property that you're building into it, there might be a case to move it in like during the rehab process. Like I said, it's kind of specialized when you come to BRRRR. So I would just say hit us up and let us know a little bit more about the structure. But as kind of a general rule, because the BRRRR method is used for lower type of properties on the front end, it's okay to hold them out. But yeah, I would definitely work with, if not us, an attorney during that phase.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, we'll take one more question. Morton, what can I answer for you? Hey, Morton, what can I answer for you, bud?
Oh, I was trying to unmute here. Actually, it's getting back on the prior question before the most recent gentleman here in terms of putting your primary residence in. I just want to make sure I got that correctly here. So you're saying if you have a primary residence or even a secondary residence for that matter, your own personal residence that you have a mortgage on, and therefore you have, what is it now, up to $750,000 mortgage that you can get interest depreciation or interest deduction on. It used to be $1 million.
I'm not going to comment on that. Right? I don't have the numbers on front of my mind.
No, but anyway, it's around that level, right? So
yeah.
So it, if you own it in your personal name, you can deduct the interest on up to, I think now it's $750,000 mortgage on your residence. But you're saying if you take that residence and put it into a land trust that again is owned by a child LLC, which is owned by the Sirius LLC, blah blah blah, then you're saying then you actually would lose the deductibility of the interest expenses.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So there are some very rare caveats to that, but the blanket rule for 99% of folks, if you move it into an entity, you're going to lose those protections. So what we typically do in those scenarios is get with your CPA, talk about your personal tax setup, figure out if it's worth it if you do apply for any of those caveats. But like I said, those are extremely rare. So kind of foundational rule is we don't move primary residences.
Okay, but if it's a primary residence that you have no mortgage on, then presumably there should be no issue with putting it in, right? Because you're not losing any interest expense or deductibility because you have no interest expense.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So you don't have the tax considerations at that point for the most part. There are still things that I think are a better fit, like equity stripping, but we'd have to get into more of a personalized structure to be able to walk through that. But yeah, you're on the right path.
What is equity stripping?
It's essentially where you create a note. You are your own mortgage lender. You create a mortgage, record it so publicly it looks like you don't own, that you have this property really leveraged, but you hold that note. And you know, maybe we'll do one of these shows specifically on equity stripping, but you become your own lender at that point.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Well, guys, I am going to go ahead and wrap it up here. I really appreciate everybody joining us today. This was the first one of the short-term investor series. We're going to do this every Monday. And so what it'll look like for a couple of weeks, we're going to walk through the different products you can use as a short-term investor and how that can be tailored to your portfolio. And then after that, we're going to get in some really cool stuff like having guest speakers who specialize in this area, market updates specifically for short-term investors. So highly recommend, you know, keep showing up, keep asking questions and building this community as well, because these meetings are going to be a great place to connect with like-minded folks. Now, like I mentioned, we do have Royal Life coming up here in just a moment, but we've also got shows going to be every day of the week. So keep an eye on your emails. Ken's also dropping some links and things in the chat, and that's going to be ways for you to connect through new shows, through our quiz, ways to plug in so we know how we can best help you. So thanks again for showing up, guys. Anything that comes up, feel free to email and reach out to our team, and then hopefully I'll see all the short-term folks again next Monday. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Megan.